are in Senior English A, and our objective now for the hour is a close study of the general prologue. Now, when we're looking at the general prologue of the Canterbury Tales, we have created a little schemata, a little chart for ourselves that says the following. At the top, general prologue, Canterbury Tales. If it doesn't say it, write it down. General prologue, characters, Canterbury Tales. And we're going to look at each one of these characters. We've numbered these characters 1 through at least 29, maybe more. We'll see how we number it. And then we've given ourselves under each number A, B, and C. Let's designate now for the very first one, and you can just write this out to the left-hand margin, for each one of these as we go. At the A, remember at the number, you're putting what it is. So, for example, our very first character will be the knight. We will get there, right? We will get there. We're gonna actually listen to the opening lines of the general prologue all the way up to the knight, so we can be sure and get everything prepped for our exam. They will be in order as they're provided in the general prologue, correct?
If they're not.
So we're going then, first of all, with the name of the character next to the number. At A, again, just write this off to the left-hand side so that you know what you're looking for. At A, we're looking for what class distinction, and there are 3 possibilities. 1, they belong to the church, what we will call the religious. 2, they can be upper class. That is to say, people who come from some wealth, some means. 3, they can be working middle class. Okay? You're going to make that designation at A. At B, again, you're writing this down so you can remember. You're going to do this for every one of these characters. At B, you're going to identify one physical thing you want to remember about them on the outside. What do they look like? What do they dress like? Whatever. You're going to pick the thing that you think is the most interesting. So normally you aren't going to write this down until Ms. Laird's going to stop the tape for a second, the reading, and then you'll have an opportunity to make sure you write down one thing. Finally, C, we're going to write about what is one attitude or emotion or some reference to their thinking. Okay, that's your C. So just to review, you've got the knight already written down, number 1. Knight. A, where are we going to put this guy in terms of class? B, where are we going to put this guy in terms of the way he looks on the physical outside? C, what are we going to say about him on the inside in terms of his attitudes or whatever, all right? And we're going to work right up till the end of the hour. As our hope is to get through a number of these characters before the end of the hour. Why are we doing this? So that we can be prepared for an exam where you're asked something about the monk, something about the friar, something about the skipper, something about the cook. And you'll be able to remember that this is one of the characters. Got me? Now again, just to remind, Chaucer planned to have each one of these characters tell 2 stories. One going out, one coming back. He died before he finished his project entirely. Canterbury Tales was published, but it didn't have all of the stories. Okay, it didn't have all of the stories. We will look at only 2 of the stories, right? We'll look at the Pardoner's tale. We'll look at the Wife of Bath's tale. Those are the only 2 that we will study in our book. Got me? All right, here we go. Miss Laird, we'll go ahead and begin. You should be on page 97. All right, here we go. Let's stay focused now.
By Geoffrey Chaucer. Translated by Neville Coghill. Chaucer wrote in what we now call Middle English. The first 18 lines of the prologue are presented here in Middle English, followed by the entire prologue in a modern translation. One that April with his sure resorte, the drocht of March hath pierced to the rote, and bathed every vein in switch liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the flour. One Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath, inspired hath in every hope and hath the tender croppus, and the younger son hath in the ram his half-course rune, and smaller fools maken melodia, that slepen all the nicht with open ear. So pricketh hem natuur in hier courages, than longen folk to gon on pilgrimages, and palmares fortesec in stranga strondes, te ferna halwas, coof in sundry londas. And specially, from every sheerest ende of Engeland, to Canterbury they wende, the holly blissful martyr forteseka, that hem have holpen, one that they were seke. When, in April, the sweet showers fall and pierce the drought of March to the root, and all the veins are bathed in liquor of such power as brings about the engendering of the flower. When also Zephyrus, with his sweet breath, exhales an air in every grove and heath upon tender shoots, and the young sun his half course in the sign of the ram has run, and the small fowl are making melody that sleep away the night with open eye, so nature pricks them and their heart engages, then people long to go on pilgrimages, and palmers long to seek the stranger strands of far-off saints, hallowed in sundry lands, and especially from every shire's end in England down to Canterbury they wend, to seek the holy blissful martyr, quick to give his help to them when they were sick. It happened in that season that one day in Southwark, at the Tabard, as I lay ready to go on pilgrimage and start for Canterbury, most devout at heart, at night there came into that hostelry some 29 in a company of sundry folk, happening then to fall in fellowship, and they were pilgrims all that towards Canterbury meant to ride. The rooms and stables of the inn were wide, they made us easy, all was of the best. And shortly, when the sun had gone to rest, by speaking to them all upon the trip, I soon was one of them in fellowship, and promised to rise early and take the way to Canterbury, as you heard me say. But nonetheless, while I have time and space before my story takes a further pace, it seems a reasonable thing to say what their condition was, the full array of each of them, as it appeared to me, according to profession and degree, and what apparel they were riding in. And at a knight I therefore will begin. There was a knight, a most distinguished man, who, from the day on which he first began to ride abroad, had followed chivalry, truth, honour, generousness, and courtesy. He had done nobly in his sovereign's war, and ridden into battle, no man more, as well in Christian as heathen places, and ever honoured for his noble graces. When we took Alexandria, he was there. He often sat at table in the chair of honour above all nations when in Prussia. In Lithuania he had ridden, and Russia, no Christian man so often of his rank. When, in Granada, Algeciras sank under assault, he had been there. And in North Africa, raiding Benamarim. In Anatolia he had been as well, and fought when Aias and Attila fell. For all along the Mediterranean coast he had embarked, with many a noble host. In 15 mortal battles he had been, and jousted for our faith at Tramesin thrice in the lists, and always killed his man. This same distinguished knight had led the van once, with the Bey of Belat, doing work for him against another heathen Turk. He was of sovereign value in all eyes, and though so much distinguished, he was wise, and in his bearing modest as a maid. He never yet a boorish thing had said in all his life to any, come what might. He was a true, a perfect, gentle knight. Speaking of his equipment, he possessed fine horses, but he was not gaily dressed. He wore a fustian tunic, stained and dark with smudges where his armour had left mark. Just home from service, he had joined our ranks to do his pilgrimage and render thanks.
Okay, who's the first one?
He's wise.
Knight. The knight. So we're working with the knight right now. What social status does he have?
On
Upper class. So that should be your A. B was the last thing that they talked about. How is he dressed?
nicely.
His tunic was worn out, it was stained, it showed his travels. He's been all over the world. He fought in the Crusades. He's a very distinguished elder man. He's always considered polite. What are some other things that they discussed about him?
He's wise.
He's wise.
And modern. No, it was
Modest?
as a.
Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add? So do you have your A, B, and your C? All right. Let's move on. Who's the next one? The squire. So pay attention to the squire.
He had his son with him, a fine young squire, a lover and cadet, a lad of fire, with locks as curly as if they had been pressed. He was some 20 years of age, I guessed. In stature, he was of a moderate length, with wonderful agility and strength. He'd seen some service with the cavalry in Flanders and Artois and Picardy, and had done valiantly, in little space of time, in hope to win his lady's grace. He was embroidered like a meadow, bright and full of freshest flowers, red and white. Singing he was, or fluting all the day. He was as fresh as is the month of May. Short was his gown, the sleeves were long and wide. He knew the way to sit a horse and ride. He could make songs and poems and recite, knew how to joust and dance, to draw and write. He loved so hotly that till dawn grew pale, he slept as little as a nightingale. Courteous he was, lowly and serviceable, and carved to serve his father at the table.
Okay. What class is, what are we talking about?
Upper.
He's upper class. He is the son of the knight. Okay, so these two are traveling together. Of his appearance, what do we know?
He's strong.
He's strong, he's young, he's athletic, he's good looking. What about his dress?
It was nice.
It was unnice.
It was nice. It was a short tunic with long sleeves with something more specific that they described. What about his personality? He was courteous to who?
Everybody.
His father, but especially the lady.
Slut.
What does it say about what he does at night? Did anybody catch
He
that?
goes out and does stuff.
He loves so hotly that he doesn't get much sleep at all.
Ew. He bangs his right.
Right. Okay.
Cochino.
Go back and read that last part.
I didn't get that.
He what?
Bangs. Oh.
He loved so hotly that till dawn grew pale, he slept as little as a nightingale.
So he was out all the time.
He was out all the time. He was a young guy. Was there anything anyone else wanted to add?
Next one.
Okay, you have your A, B, and C. Let's move on. Who's the next one?
Alexander.
No, it's that
The yeoman.
There was a yeoman with him at his side, no other servant, so he chose to ride. This yeoman wore a coat and hood of green, and peacock-feathered arrows, bright and keen and neatly sheathed, hung at his belt the while. For he could dress his gear in yeoman style, his arrows never drooped their feathers low. And in his hand he bore a mighty bow. His head was like a nut, his face was brown. He knew the whole of woodcraft up and down. A saucy brace was on his arm to ward it from the bowstring, and a shield and sword hung at one side, and at the other slipped a jaunty dirk, spear sharp and well equipped. A medal of St. Christopher he wore, of shining silver on his breast, and bore a hunting horn, well slung and burnished clean, that dangled from a baldric of bright green. He was a proper forester, I guess. There also was an...
Okay, what do we know about the yeoman?
He wears a coat and peacock feathers.
He's upper
He
class.
looks really nice. Yes. He's dressed all in green, he's got feathers in his hat, he carries a bow. What do we know? What does he do? What is a yeoman?
Isn't he?
He's traveling with the knight and his son.
Was he upper class?
What do you think about his personality? This guy really cares about how he looks.
Conceited?
Maybe. He knows what he's doing, he's really good at what he does, and he really cares about how people perceive how he looks.
So what would you put that in?
That would be,
No, what would you call
just
that?
put it in your own words.
Conceited.
We don't know that he's conceited, but
Isn't
he
that
does really take care of his appearance. Unlike the knight who is wise,
Self-centered.
the knight looks like he's traveled, his tunic is
Full
worn.
of himself.
What is his group?
You would probably be up.
Are we gonna have a test on all of these at once, or just a couple at a time?
All right, moving on. It'll probably be one test over the Canterbury Tales. Who's the next one?
Venice.
The nun.
The nun or the prioress?
Oh, yeah.
The nun one, nun two?
Nun, a prioress.
Two nuns?
Her way of smiling very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only, "By Saint Loy," and she was known as Madame Eglantine. And well she sang a service, with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly, and she spoke daintily in French, extremely, after the school of Stratford at Bow, French in the Paris style she did not know. At meat her manners were well taught withal, no morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep, but she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. For courtliness she had a special zest, and she would wipe her upper lip so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen upon the cup when she had drunk. To eat, she reached a hand sedately for the meat. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing fitting to her place, and to seem dignified in all her dealings. As for her sympathies and tender feelings, she was so charitably solicitous, she used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap if it were dead or bleeding. And she had little dogs she would be feeding with roasted flesh, or milk, or fine white bread. And bitterly she wept if one were dead, or someone took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way, her nose was elegant, her eyes glass grey. Her mouth was very small, but soft and red. Her forehead certainly was fair of spread, almost a span across the brows I own. She was indeed by no means undergrown. Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm. A set of beads, the gaudies, tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of brightest sheen, on which there first was graven a crowned A, and lower, Amor vincit omnia.
Okay, the prioress. What class is she?
Upper.
The church. Religious. She's a nun. How was she dressed?
She had a cloak on.
She had a cloak, she wore a veil, gray eyes, she was described as pretty. And when he said she definitely was not unfed, what was he implying? Well, she's not.
She's a long, chunky
She's
side.
curvy.
She's curvy. What about her personality?
She's tender-hearted.
She's tender-hearted, she takes care of her animals, she has really good manners. She's pleasant, she's friendly. Okay, next. We have, we aren't gonna get much description on the next two, so you're just going to have part A, which will be what? The priests and the next nun belong to which class?
Upper.
Religious.
Church.
Upper and church are two different classes.
Wait, so we're supposed
Okay, here we go.
Another nun, the chaplain at her cell, was riding with her, and 3 priests as well. A monk there was, one of the finest sort, who rode the country. Hunting was his sport. A manly man, to be an abbot able. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bridle, when he rode, a man might hear jingling in a whistling wind, as clear, aye, and as loud as does the chapel bell where my lord monk was prior of the cell. The rule of good St. Bennet or St. Maur, as old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday, and took the modern world's more spacious way. He did not rate that text at a plucked hen, which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water, flapping on the pier. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. That was a text he held not worth an oyster, and I agreed, and said his views were sound. Was he to study till his head went round, poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil as Austin bade, and till the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labour to himself. This monk was, therefore, a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun, he spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine grey fur, the finest in the land. And on his hood, to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold, cunningly fashioned pin into a lover's knot, it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like looking-glass. So did his face, as if it had been greased. He was a fat and personable priest. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath a kettle. Supple his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked a fat swan best, and roasted whole. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry.
Okay, what do we know about the monk? What class is he? He's the church. How is he described?
Fat.
He was fat.
We wore boots and a vest.
Nice boots. He had expensive fur on his cloak. Big eyes. He wore a gold brooch. What about his personality?
Manly man.
He's a manly man. Did he follow the old ways that said a monk must do this, study? No, he was into the more modern ways it said. He liked to hunt, he liked to ride his horse, he liked to go out and have fun. Okay. Next we have the what? The friar. Okay, let's go.
There was a friar, a wanton one and merry, a limiter, a very festive fellow. In all 4 orders there was none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-turned speech. He'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order. Highly beloved and intimate was he with county folk within his boundary, and city dames of honour and possessions, for he was qualified to hear confessions, or so he said, with more than priestly scope. He had a special license from the Pope. Sweetly, he heard his penitents at shrift with pleasant absolution for a gift. He was an easy man in penance giving, where he could hope to make a decent living. It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well shriven, and should he give enough, he knew in verity the penitent repented in sincerity. For many a fellow is so hard of heart he cannot weep for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. He kept his tippet stuffed with pins for curls, and pocket knives to give to pretty girls. And certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs he was champion of the hour, His neck was whiter than a lily flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too. Better than lepers, beggars, and that crew. For in so eminent a man as he, it was not fitting with the dignity of his position, dealing with a scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of dealings with the slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. But anywhere a profit might accrue, courteous he was, and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went. For though a widow mightn't have a shoe, so pleasant was his holy how-d'ye-do that he got his farthing from her just the same before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out. And how he romped just like a puppy. He was ever prompt to arbitrate disputes on settling days, for a small fee, in many helpful ways. Not then appearing as your cloistered scholar with threadbare habit hardly worth $1, but much more like a doctor or a pope. Of double worsted was the semi-cope upon his shoulders, and the swelling fold about him, like a bell about its mould when it is casting, rounded out his dress. He lisped a little out of wantonness, to make his English sweet upon his tongue. When he had played his harp, or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This worthy's name was Hubert, it appeared.
Okay, what do we know about Friar? We talked about him a little bit yesterday.
He's
He likes
What does this guy do?
he begs a lot.
Well, yeah, well, what does he do with the young girls in his,
gets him pregnant.
gets them pregnant and then marries them off?
So
What else does he do? He takes money. He loves getting money. He does everything for a fee. He gives absolution for a fee. He'll settle arguments for a fee. Are friars, priests supposed to be taking money for this? No.
is this church?
He would be church, yes.
Do we put church or religious?
Church.
Either one.
How, did anybody catch how he was dressed? Said he was dressed very richly, like a pope or a doctor, so he wore really, really nice robes, really, really nice clothes. He did not like to be down with the sick people or the poor people. He only liked to hang out with rich people. So priests are supposed to be poor, but he's not. He's actually very rich. So, and priests are supposed to be celibate, but is he? Who's the next one? Merchant. Okay.
There was a merchant with a forking beard and motley dress. High on his horse he sat. Upon his head a Flemish beaver hat, and on his feet daintily buckled boots. He told of his opinions and pursuits in solemn tones, and how he never lost. The sea should be kept free at any cost, he thought, upon the Harwich Holland range. He was expert at currency exchange. This estimable merchant so had set his wits to work, none knew he was in debt. He was so stately in negotiation, loan, bargain, and commercial obligation. He was an excellent fellow, all the same. To tell the truth, I do not know his name.
Okay, the merchant. Anybody want to take a swing at this one?
He has a beard.
Is he lower class?
Middle with a
It's a forking beard.
beard.
He has a beard, he wears a beaver hat.
Who's the lower class, is he?
He acts like he's on
Middle.
a high level.
Middle class?
Okay.
What does a merchant do?
Sills.
Sells and trades stuff. So this guy had such a slick tongue and could talk people into making deals that nobody knew that he was really in debt.
So he's
Scam artist.
He's He's just
This is the one.
knows how to do his job, knows how to trade and sell stuff without people suspecting. Not necessarily a scam artist.
He's
How do you call
smooth
it?
talker.
Yeah.
Scammer just never
Mom.
Okay, who's next?
The Oxford Cleric.
The Oxford Cleric is who you guys should have. What number are we on, guys?
9.
What was it?
No,
We're on 10.
we're on 10.
Oh, because of 3 priests. I didn't write that down.
Okay, let's go. Guys, I need you to pay attention, please.
An Oxford cleric, still a student though, one who had taken logic long ago, was there. His horse was thinner than a rake, and he was not too fat, I undertake, but had a hollow look, a sober stare. The thread upon his overcoat was bare. He had found no preferment in the church, and he was too unworldly to make search for secular employment. By his bed, he preferred having 20 books in red and black of Aristotle's philosophy to having fine clothes, fiddle, or psaltery. Though a philosopher, as I have told, he had not found the stone for making gold. Whatever money from his friends he took, he spent on learning or another book, and prayed for them most earnestly, returning thanks to them thus for paying for his learning. His only care was study, and indeed he never spoke a word more than was need. Formal at that, respectful in the extreme, short to the point and lofty in his theme. The thought of moral virtue filled his speech, and he would gladly learn and gladly teach. A sergeant at the law who paid his calls.
Okay, what do we know about the Oxford Cleric?
Just a
What class is he?
upper. Lower?
He would be middle, lower class.
Which one?
How's he dressed? What does this guy look like?
He cares more about his books than what he looks like.
Right, his attire is very poor and shabby. He's really skinny, looks like he's starving. Because any money he does get, what does he spend it on?
Education.
Books. What does he care most about?
Learning.
Learning more.
Being knowledgeable.
Gaining more knowledge.
So. Knowledgeable. Okay.
Anybody catch who was next?
Sergeant.
Sergeant at the law. Okay, here we go.
Wary and wise for clients at St. Paul's there also was of noted excellence. Discreet he was, a man to reverence, or so he seemed, his sayings were so wise. He often had been justice of assize by letters patent and in full commission. His fame and learning and his high position had won him many a robe and many a fee. There was no such conveyancer as he. All was fee simple to his strong digestion. Not one conveyance could be called in question. Nowhere there was so busy a man as he, but was less busy than he seemed to be. He knew of every judgment, case, and crime recorded ever since King William's time. He could dictate defences or draft deeds. No one could pinch a comma from his screeds, and he knew every statute off by rote. He wore a homely party-coloured coat, girt with a silken belt of pinstripe stuff. Of his appearance I have said enough. There was a
Okay. Take a stab. What class would you guess that the sergeant at law?
Upper.
Okay, how was he dressed? The very last part describes how he was.
Party colored coat.
Party colored coat, silken belt, stripes. Anybody want to give any personality traits about this guy?
He's wise.
About what specifically? What does he know a lot about?
Crime.
Crime, the law, the history of law. He's always talking about it. Anytime anybody has a question, he's ready to answer them about that.
He knows about the law. He remembers the law.
Okay,
Law-abiding citizen.
who's next?
Franklin with him, it appeared. White as a daisy petal was his beard. A sanguine man, high-coloured and benign, he loved a morning sop of cake in wine. He lived for pleasure and had always done, for he was Epicurus's very son, in whose opinion sensual delight was the one true felicity in sight. As noted as St. Julian was for bounty, he made his household free to all the county. His bread, his ale were the finest of the fine, and no one had a better stock of wine. His house was never short of bake-meat pies, of fish and flesh, and these in such supplies it positively snowed with meat and drink, and all the dainties that a man could think. According to the seasons of the year, changes of dish were ordered to appear. He kept fat partridges in coops beyond, many a bream and pike were in his pond. Woe to the cook whose sauces had no sting, or who was unprepared in anything. And in his hall a table stood arrayed and ready all day long, with places laid. As justice at the sessions none stood higher. He often had been member for the shire. A dagger and a little purse of silk hung at his girdle, white as morning milk. As sheriff, he checked audit every entry. He was a model among landed gentry.
Okay, Franklin, upper class. He's a wealthy landowner.
He's a cop.
How was he described? His physical attire.
A white beard.
He had a white beard, which indicates that he's older. And if you were to just give one short phrase about this guy, what would you say his main thing in life? What did this guy live for?
Eating.
Pleasure. He lived for pleasure.
Pleasure.
He always had good food around. People could come and go. This guy liked to live for a good time. He was rich and he could. Okay, now the next, we just have a list of people. And they kind of are gonna, so let's take a minute. Who has them all written down? Who are we talking about next?
Haberdasher, dyer, carpenter, weaver, carpet maker.
Okay, what class would you guess these guys are?
Hey guys, can I explain to you? This is what we call for your notes the guild fraternity. If today you're going to build a house, you ask a single construction guy, right, to come in. He's going to frame the house, but he's normally not going to do the electrical work, is he? He's going to contract out to an electrician. He's not going to do the plumbing work, is he? He's going to contract out to a plumber. He's not going to do the laying of the carpet, is he? He's going to contract out to, do you get my drift? In other words, all these guys fit together as a guild fraternity. They kind of all work together, okay? So we'll definitely put them middle class, all right? They don't have wealth, but they are workers, okay? Sorry, Miss Slater.
Oh, no problem.
A haberdasher, a dyer, a carpenter, a weaver and a carpet maker were among our ranks, all in the livery of one impressive guild fraternity. They were so trim and fresh, their gear would pass for new. Their knives were not tricked out with brass, but wrought with purest silver, which avouches a like display on girdles and on pouches. Each seemed a worthy burgess, fit to grace a guild hall with a seat upon the dais. Their wisdom would have justified a plan to make each one of them an alderman. They had the capital and revenue. Besides, their wives declared it was their due. And if they did not think so, then they ought. To be called madam is a glorious thought. And so is going to church, and being seen having your mantle carried like a queen.
Okay, real quick, what do we know about these guys? They're middle class. What about their clothes? How did these guys appear?
Nice.
Really nice, really new clothes. Their knives were made of silver. So what do you don't actually use a knife of silver. Silver's soft, so it's just for show. It's to show that they have some wealth. Personality, anybody catch anything about these guys?
They're wide.
No? They want to move up. They want to move up as high as they can in their class. So they're going to show off a little bit.
Oh,
Show off their wealth.
yeah.
Okay, who's next?
I'll be the house of God.
Cook.
Oh, cook.
Their wives like to be, if their wife could be referred to as madam, that would be a huge compliment. Cook. We are on line 389, on page 107.
What about my dad?
When they say madame, that is referring to their wives.
So that's not one?
No. The next one is cook.
They had a cook with them who stood alone for boiling chicken with a marrow bone, sharp flavouring powder, and a spice for savour. He could distinguish London ale by flavour, and he could roast and seethe and broil and fry, make good thick soup and bake a tasty pie. But what a pity, so it seemed to me, that he should have an ulcer on his knee. As for blancmange, he made it with the best.
Okay, cook. What class is he?
Middle.
Middle class, working class. What's a physical thing we might want to remember about Cook?
That.
He's got a yucky, pussy ulcer on his knee. So when everybody, when they would eat his food, that's what they were thinking about. Jimmy,
What?
what about the personality of the cook?
He's nice.
I need you guys to stop talking too much and pay a little bit closer attention, please.
Okay.
Anybody get anything about the personality of the cook? One thing you could say is he had a really good nose for food, so obviously he's a cook, really fine senses for taste and smell. A good smeller.
Skipper.
Okay, who's next? Anybody want to guess what a skipper is? Really?
A guy, isn't it like someone after the captain or something?
So you're thinking,
Like skipper and the captain?
Jimmy thinks he's a farmer.
Yeah.
Jimmy thinks he's
Isn't he
a
a kind
farmer.
of farmer?
Jimmy, did you actually read this?
Good job!
Okay,
There was a skipper hailing from far west. He came from Dartmouth, so I understood. He rode a farmer's horse as best he could in a woolen gown that reached his knee. A dagger on a lanyard falling free hung from his neck, under his arm and down. The summer heat had tanned his colour brown, and certainly he was an excellent fellow. Many a draught of vintage, red and yellow, he'd drawn at Bordeaux, while the trader snored. The nicer rules of conscience he ignored. If, when he fought, the enemy vessel sank, he sent his prisoners home. They walked the plank.
okay.
Pirate.
A skipper,
He's a hand on a farm.
not on a farm, we're talking about a ship.
Yeah, hand on a
If they mess up, they walk the plank.
Good job!
Okay, so, I just wanted to see if anybody else. So no, a skipper is not a farmer,
Yeah.
Jimmy.
Close enough.
Good try.
But he's still one of the hands on the
So,
ship.
Middle,
he's a
okay.
mate.
How did this guy look? He's out on the sea all the time,
He's tan,
he's very tan,
a gown that only
he
covers
wears
his
simple
knees.
woolen gown, carries a dagger with him.
Would he be
So
considered
he's
a hard
low
worker?
class?
He would be middle, yeah.
Middle.
Would he be like a hard worker?
He doesn't farm.
Okay, let's finish up with the skipper.
As for his skill in reckoning his tides, currents, and many another risk besides, moons, harbours, pilots, he had such dispatch that none from Hull to Carthage was his match. Hardy he was, prudent in undertaking. His beard in many a tempest had its shaking, and he knew all the havens as they were, from Gotland to the Cape of Finisterre, and every creek in Brittany and Spain. The barge.
Okay, so we ended with the skipper. That was number what, guys?
19.
15.
Huh?
We're on 15.
Number 15. All right, so we'll come back tomorrow to continue, yeah?